Last but not least, to another diaspora in Europe, the Assyrian diaspora. One of the diasporas that Nicola was defining as the invisible diasporas, and I wanted to ask you why, because I could see what you had on your slides, and then you gave exactly the Assyrian diaspora as an example. So we're very pleased to have here the president of the Assyrian Federation in Belgium, so Nahar Aslan. Thank you very much for being with us, and we're taking the floor in order to introduce the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Don't worry, I won't be too long. I just want to give you a general introduction to the European Assyrian diaspora. Sylvia will then go deeper in the diaspora, especially in the case of Sweden. So, as you mentioned, I'm the president of the Assyrian Federation of Belgium, but I'm also a board member of the Assyrian Confederation of Europe, which is a newly established international confederation with 4 national Assyrian federations in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden. So, who are the Assyrian? It's an ancient community from the Middle East, obviously, but it's a young diaspora here in Europe, but in other places too. The Assyrian have been scattered across the globe since the Assyrian genocide of 1915. We call it Seifo in our language, which means the sword. We used to say Shatot Seifo, 1915. It means the year of the sword, an event that has decimated this most of ancient nations, along with the Armenian and the Greek population of what will become the Republic of Turkey. So today Assyrians can be found everywhere in the West, in a young but nonetheless strong diaspora. Even though the majority of Assyrians of Europe arrived during the second half of the 20th century, the existence of the Assyrian diaspora predates that migration. We can find first traces of Assyrians, especially in south of France, where Christian minorities of the Ottoman Empire arrived and settled there after First World War, and find places and work in the Europe which was devastated after the war. So many Assyrians chose to settle on the old continent. Some of them continue their journey to the America and South America. It was the beginning of an adventure, or we can even say of a tragedy, because this tragedy continues to be written today with the arrival of the last Assyrians of the Middle East fleeing the scourge of the Islamic State and the oppression by Arab, Kurdish and Turkish government. I like to think that the motto of the European Union, United in Diversity, applies very well to this ancient community. Owing to a lack of secular representation, they were often designated by the names of their churches: Syriac Orthodox Church, Syriac Catholic Church, Assyrian Church of the East, Chaldean Church. Yet they are one nation. We are Assyrians by culture, by the ethnic, by the language we speak. We are one nation, but with various names. Their glorious past is inscribed in the dry plains of Mesopotamia. And now in Europe, of course, they are a minority, as are the Armenians, the Jews, the Roma, and other communities. We have large communities in some countries of Europe, like Sweden and Germany, but in other countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, and United Kingdom as well, smaller communities. One common feature of all these communities is the struggle for preservation of the Assyrian identity. As with other European diaspora, the integration of Assyrians into mainstream European society passes through several stages. As Assyrians in Europe continue to grow in number, we are nearly 500,000 people now in Europe, which is not nothing, infrastructure needs to be built to support this community. Schools need to be built also to teach the language, which is very important for us. Cultural centers we need also cultural centers to house and transmit the heritage of this ancient community. We need magazines to communicate with the mainstream, with our communities all over Europe, and to maintain a link between all these groups scattered over the continent. This example addressed the internal aspect of self-preservation, but external measures are also required. Mainstream European society is not aware of the presence of Assyrian in its daily life. So of course it is the responsibility of every European Assyrian, especially the activists and the organizations, that's the role of the newly established Assyrian Confederation of Europe, to promote the Assyrian identity and make European institutions aware of the ongoing tragedy of the Assyrians in their homeland. So the question is, what is the future for the European Assyrian as a diaspora? Well, despite the fact that diaspora is today more organized than it was at its beginning, 50 years ago, next year we'll celebrate the 50 years of Assyrians in Europe, since the first plane arrived from Lebanon to Germany in 1967. The survival of the Assyrians as a nation, and I say as a nation, not only as a diaspora, must be sought in the creation of an autonomous area somewhere, and this place is north of Iraq, what we call today the Nineveh Plain, a safe haven for the minorities of Iraq. This place is really important and will allow the Assyrians and other communities of North Iraq to cultivate their language and their culture and promote openly their existence. The need for such an area has become even more urgent now that the Assyrians are fleeing in massive number from their original area of settlement in the Middle East. Despite the promotion of their culture and identity in Europe, Assyrians face an existential crisis in the Middle East. The role played by the diaspora is then crucial for the future of the Assyrians, both in terms of their existence within the diaspora, but also in their central homeland. So as I mentioned before, Sweden is a special case for the Assyrian because it has a larger number of Assyrians in Europe. Sylvia Loa, who is an American from Costa Rica, anthropologist, she focused her study on the Swedish Assyrian community, and she also made an internship at the Assyrian Federation of Sweden, so she's very well aware of this community, and she will now share with you some outcomes of her thesis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nora, for the introduction. I'm going to follow up on several of the topics that you brought up in the introduction, like the political engagement of Assyrians in Europe, and a bit also this issue with the invisible diaspora, that's brought up by Nicholas and now by you. And as he said, most of my discussion will center on Sweden, as that's where I did my master's thesis research. And it's one of the largest Assyrian communities in Europe. It numbers around 120,000 individuals or upwards. And it's also a very interesting context for this diaspora. It's, I would say that the Swedish Assyrian diaspora is the best organized in Europe. And this is, I will explain this, especially because of the context into which Assyrians arrived in Sweden, the political context. And this has had both positive and negative consequences for the Assyrian community. As Nahar said, it's 50 years since Assyrians arrived in Sweden. The first ones coming from Lebanon, although then they were followed by big waves from Turkey, as well as from Syria, later Iraq, and now again Syria. And when Assyrians arrived into Sweden, after some time there was, Sweden really tries to support minorities that came in, so they provide a lot of funding for Assyrians and other immigrant groups to build associations, build cultural centers. So this diaspora provided for Assyrians a space to pick up an Assyrian nationalist movement that had been in development in the homeland before the Seifo, before 1915, which unfortunately was kind of broken after that time, but it was picked up again in diaspora, including in Sweden. And this has been a site then for unity, but also for contestation. So Sweden, by providing some funding and support for its diaspora communities, it has also created a space where Assyrians have faced some tensions inside the community. So those who lean more towards secular activism and those who lean more towards church activism, or who are more influenced by the power of the church. I'm not going to dwell too much on this naming issue, but it has led to Assyrians often being relegated to just their Christian identity rather than an ethnic identity, which is what Nahar is bringing up, that it's very important for Assyrians activists to mention. It's one nation, one language, it's not a church identity. But so this open space for discussion, it has helped Assyrians to develop their identity, but also allowed people to develop different understandings of this history, or what parts of the Assyrian history should be promoted. And this is also a space for an interplay between the diaspora and forces from the homeland. So a lot of these issues with the church, for example, they were brought from the Middle East. This was something, it's not a blank slate when you move as a diaspora. You also have this, still the effect of the homeland, or issues, political issues that follow you. And this has affected their representation, which is my next point. Again, this was something brought up earlier. The representation and the importance of an accurate representation, the primacy of recognition. So again, being seen as an ethnic group, not as a religious group, and to reunite under a single term as an Assyrian identity. Part of this is taking this narrative back. So often in the media, Assyrians are either rendered invisible or misrepresented. So they're called, for example, they're just relegated to being Iraqi Christians or Turkish Christians, or things where it's the nationality and the Christian, or even Assyrian Christian, which again, at least there is the ethnic identity being referred to, but why always this Christian identity? So it's taking back the narrative, recreating creating a new, a stronger ethnic united identity. And this is very important for Assyrian activists who see as he said, there is a feeling of obligation because of the violence that Assyrians have faced, and this sense that you need to maintain this identity. So the diaspora is a moral community with a moral obligation to represent their struggle and the current violence and the past violence to others. And here there's a dual role. One is helping their own community in the diaspora to be preserved, helping also the people still left in the homeland who are currently facing, for example, violence from the Islamic State or from repressive governments. But it's also what I have found from speaking to Assyrian activists in Sweden, for example, there's also a sense of a duty to the new country as well, to the host country. So you're European, you're also Assyrian. And so by providing information about the Middle East, how you have seen it, how your people have experienced it, you're providing a more thorough and more contextualized image of the history and of the current political situation. So it's not just providing a voice for the community, for this diaspora community, but also to help politicians or to help ordinary people to understand the situation better. And the diaspora, again, in this interplay between the homeland and the diaspora can put pressure on the homeland in certain situations. So, for example, Assyrians have put pressure on the Turkish government at different times for the release of certain captives, or for when the Turkish state has threatened to take sacred parts of Assyrian land. So it's always putting the pressure. The diaspora can assist in ways that the people in the homeland maybe cannot. Apart from this, there's also very strong activism towards the homeland, towards creating an autonomous region. And again, this moral community, the feeling of an obligation, is partially why some Assyrians may become politically engaged. Of course, this varies by individual. You cannot say that somebody who is Assyrian in Sweden, there's Syrian politicians who are not engaged with the Assyrian issues, but it can always be a dual role as well. So engaging politically for the purposes of the diaspora, but also for things for the new host country. So the combination of the new context and the diaspora concerns. So, again, coming back to, like for example, the Assyrian homeland and recognition, there is a need to create and to take back the narrative, which was something very important for the invisible diaspora, creating a united concept of history and ethnicity. So one thing is a need to teach activists or to teach Assyrians a specific narrative or a very good understanding of their own history and of the aims of an Assyrian movement. So this is something being worked on, for example, by the Assyrian Federation, probably also by in Sweden, but also probably also in other countries, with the goal that an Assyrian activist can very clearly answer and to any questions about their identity or any doubts about their history or about their identity or about the history. And this also helps in the nation building. Building a nation, I don't mean just lobbying towards an autonomous region, although this is very important for helping to keep Assyrians in the home and so they don't all end up in diaspora. Already the majority of Assyrians are in diaspora rather than in the Middle East. But it's also, it's very critical for this kind of stateless diaspora to preserve their history and preserve the community. And in one particular thing is, as Nahar was saying, by creating more infrastructure. So in Sweden now there's also quite a big movement to create schools. So there's already a couple of Assyrian profile schools in Södertälje, which is an area that has a very large Assyrian community. I would say that's the central place for Assyrians in Sweden. It's a town a bit south of Stockholm. And there's a school that teaches not only the history but also the language, and it's also a way to, because Assyrians speak the same language but it's different dialects, and these dialects are not necessarily mutually intelligible to one another. So this is a way of bridging the gap and helping to create a united nation even when you are in diaspora, bridging the gaps that were created by boundaries in the Middle East. At the same time that maybe new divisions are being created in diaspora from people who are maybe Assyrians in Europe versus Assyrians in the US or across different countries in Europe. As well, with the longer time that Assyrians have spent in Europe, it seems to become easier for them to be able to organize. So now, as Nahar also brought up, this founding of an Assyrian Confederation of Europe, which was established this year. Of course, as Assyrians, as a group of people, spend more time in the country, they become more familiar with the system. Assyrians can speak many European languages, they're very familiar with the system, so it's easier to, or it makes more sense to begin to utilize opportunities not only in your country, but to create these supranational organizations and to utilize the entire European Union system. And to use this knowledge, again, to promote their own, to help make Assyrians more visible in the public sphere, to promote this autonomy in the Middle East, to help create more Assyrian profile schools, promote the education of Assyrians, and to make it a desirable identity to maintain. I think, yeah, I tried to cover quite a few things.
You basically covered everything that was said in this. I mean, all the concepts that were already covered in this meeting, you merged them in your presentation. So thank you so much.